You surface from the underground at Piccadilly Circus,
Mind the gap.
making your way through the glittering lights of London's West End. You take a turn down a quaint-looking street into the notorious neighborhood of Soho. The lights are dimming, the crowd is buzzing, and you've just tuned in to the best seat in the house. Welcome to The Big Smoke, a variety show podcast. I'm Kevin Bennett, and I'll be your guide through this experience of comedy, conversation, and community. Today, we're stepping into the fascinating world of juggling. From ancient Egypt to Covent Garden to stages all around the world. My guest is Sean Gandini, co-founder of the internationally renowned Gandini Juggling. Together, we explore how a simple act of throwing and catching became a lifelong passion, a collaborative art form, and a gateway into storytelling and even philosophy. From the history of juggling to embracing the drop, Sean reveals how juggling can help us see the world a little differently. We're also trying something new, bringing you episodes every single week. So stay tuned next Thursday for more adventurous audio, including another installment from the historical London Loo Tours and the return of the apprentice podcasting magicians, the Strange Brothers. But for now, let's tune in. Raised in Havana, Cuba, Sean was initially captivated by magic and mathematics before discovering juggling at 16, igniting a lifelong fascination with the craft, guided by a natural curiosity for the geometry of items in flight. His professional career began in the 1980s as a regular performer in London's Covent Garden. In the early 1990s, he co-founded Gandini Juggling, initiating a long series of experiments into the choreographic possibilities of object manipulation. So, let's keep our eyes on the balls and say hello to Sean. Sean, welcome to The Big Smoke. Thank you so much for joining me.
A pleasure to be here.
It's great to have you here. And so I've really enjoyed studying up on you and also on Gandini Juggling. I thought we'd start with, to the listener, this might seem like a really obvious question, but I think I'm curious as to what your answer is to this. But it is, what is juggling?
Do you know, in juggling circles, this has been discussed no end, because it seems like, to me, actually the answer would be really simple: more balls than hands, and then in a very, very succinct way. There's a definition that's going around at the moment, which is more balls than hands, and anything that seems related to that, because contemporary juggling has got quite esoteric and avant-garde, so people are kind of putting bits of sand on a table and going, is this juggling or isn't it juggling? But essentially, at its core, it is, I would say, two definitions. One is more balls than hands. But for me and for us in Gandini, it's choreographing throwing. So variations on throwing things.
This is interesting because when I was thinking about putting together the notes for this interview, I suddenly realized I hadn't connected these dots, but I work as a theater director in my other life. And one of the things that has become essential to my rehearsal process, I guess, especially in the beginning of the day, most days, is this ritual. I just call it the ball game. And it's basically the cast. Let's say there's 10 people, get in a circle, and we start with one ball, and I throw to you, you throw to someone else, they throw to someone else, and we create that pattern. We remember who we've thrown to. And then we might add multiple balls. We might do the pattern in reverse. We might do, there's like a million different variations.
So is that juggling? There's the question.
Well, that's my question. Is that juggling? I mean, it's not always more balls than hands. I mean, the challenge that I love getting to is how many balls can we get up to? But I guess I was thinking about, like, because there is a link to juggling in terms of it is having multiple balls in the air and coordination and connection with each other. I mean, we're diving right into we'll do some more basic questions, but I was just thinking about that as doing something like that as a group, throwing and catching balls. Because I think I heard you say or read you say in another interview, juggling, another definition is throwing and catching.
Yeah.
Is there an underlying kind of purpose behind some sort of ritual like that when you hear me describe that as something that we do? Because
I think the context has a lot to do with it. So the context of this is a theatre warm-up, and so its context is that. Whereas if it was some jugglers playing with how a ball gets pushed around, I think the context does matter a lot. Or there used to be, there's an American choreographer called Charles Moulton, who in the 70s and 80s made a series of pieces called ball passing. And if a juggler had made them, they would definitely be juggling, and they would definitely be quite contemporary juggling. But because he made them from a dance perspective, I feel like they're dance. I mean, at the end of the day, it's just labels. Things are out in the world and they don't need the obsession we have with labeling things.
Yeah.
I mean, there's definitely, like, if you see somebody juggling 3 things between 2 hands, it's indubitably juggling. So I think it's good. That's your starting point.
Yeah.
And then there's hovering things around and you can get further away. And in fact, I think that to me, that's always been one of the interesting things is when you're very interested in a particular art form, but you're experimenting with it, at its outskirts, you reach the other art forms like dance, theatre, and juggling can approach sound, singing, music.
I always find that interesting though too, because when I make theater and I do plays, I always like to think about, in reading about, you do a lot of collaborations with different art forms and things like that. And I find that so interesting and inspiring. And I love at the same time an exploration of what might seem super obvious to people, but just the very question of like what is needed. So like with juggling or putting on a play, like what are the essential kind of ingredients to this thing? And with the ball game that I play in rehearsals, I always say this might seem obvious, but this is a metaphor for live performance. And we usually have different challenges and different sequences and things like that. And the team gets better and better, or they grow if they do it every day for half an hour in the beginning of the day or whatever it is. And I was just thinking, it reminds me about something that I want to get to in a little bit talking to you, is this bringing narrative into the performances, because I use the ball game in my rehearsals as like I said, a metaphor for putting on a play. So I'm curious about the link to how you started to create narrative in your juggling. Let's go back a little bit and start, and just a bit of the history of how you got into it. So what was your first contact with juggling? What got you into it?
So I did magic. I was a kind of amateur magician when I was a child. And I grew up in Havana, and then I moved to Ottawa.
Oh, really? Okay.
And then I used to do little magic shows when I was like 12. I think I was even on this random TV show, which at one point I should find what it was. But
did you have a magic book, or did you see it on TV or something?
In Havana, there was a taxi driver who took me a little bit under his wing and taught me some magic and gave me some magic tricks, which I still have in a box somewhere. Then in Canada, the public libraries, there used to be all these, the joy of going to the library and getting magic books. I felt like I was having access to this secret mystical information. But juggling was always kind of hovering in the background. I think I could always do 2 balls in one hand or something like that. And I think later in my teens, I went to Covent Garden and I saw somebody juggling 5 balls. And to me, that was like a cathartic moment. There was something so intrinsically primal and beautiful about it. I always really enjoyed mathematics as well, and kind of visual art. And there was something about this 5-ball pattern that I thought, I have to learn this. It's my life will not be complete unless. And then I kind of got obsessed with this geometry. And then further down, I saw a Russian juggler on a French television show, because I was living in France then, called Sergei Ignatov, who was one of the great technical jugglers of all time, probably. And he was doing something that's called 5 club back crosses. And everything was going just to this right height. There was something about it that just really took me. This was before I had any sense of it being an art form or anything like that. It was just this primal physicality.
Well, it's interesting because I think you've said before, or I read somewhere that in the connection to magic and juggling, I think is interesting, where there's a dexterousness, there's an ability to be really nimble and skillful with your hands and your coordination. And in magic, you hide that.
Oh, completely.
And in juggling, it's all on display.
And we tour, the main piece we're touring at the moment, it's called Heka, and it is magic and juggling together. And that substantial difference, even though it starts from the same point of practicing, the end result psychologically is so incredibly different. And I think some of our jugglers found that very difficult to hide the thing that you've been used to showing.
And so is there a mixture in that show of showing and hiding?
There's a mixture of showing and hiding. We don't show too much, but it's interesting. Even the little bit we show, we got into some interesting discussions with magicians who are very adamant that you shouldn't show, and there's a whole separate conversation to be had about that. But that whole hiding and showing is enormous, and from a choreographic point of view, I think I'm quite a modernist in how I approach choreography. I like cutting things up and putting the end at the beginning and disrespecting the natural order. But in magic, you can't. If I turn up on stage and I open a closed fist and show you that it's empty, I'm just a weird man opening a hand because you haven't seen anything go in.
Yes.
You need the narrative. Yeah. Magic needs narrative. And to me, that was a really complex, intriguing thing because I was going in with this idea of let's chop this up. And certainly when we worked with dance, you can do that with dance and you can do that with text. But no, magic is intrinsically narrative.
So you do these big shows and they're often ensemble based and there's multiple jugglers juggling on their own and with each other and there's collaborations and we're going to get into a lot of that. But you said you went to Covent Garden. Did you juggle at Covent Garden?
So I started my first few shows in Covent Garden were doing magic.
Okay, and so you were like a street performer.
Yeah. And then I became a street juggler.
Okay.
So I performed in Covent Garden maybe 3 years, 4 years.
And this is in the 80s?
This is late 80s. Okay. So at the same time as people like Eddie Izzard were performing.
Oh, wow. Okay.
In fact, ironically, Eddie Izzard and I used to co-own a video camera because neither of us could afford a video camera. And in fact, I think I still owe him some money for that video camera. Yeah.
If you're listening, get in touch. So you were doing magic there but
I went quite quickly to juggling. Juggling kind of took over my life. And I think I have an obsessive, addictive personality. So that little period where I came from France to London, I think I was juggling 6-7 hours a day. And
wow.
And I used to love it, actually. It used to give me a neurological hit.
Did it become like a full-time job at Covent Garden?
Yeah, I did. Yeah.
Wow,
For 3 or 4 years, I completely lived off it. In fact, there was something amiss, and it doesn't exist anymore because the bags of coins. I remember I used to live in Catford and rent a flat of a very charming Jamaican lady. It was a flat that wasn't straight. It felt like a boat. And I used to pay
on a rake, like the
on
stage.
A rake, exactly, like an old Italian.
I live on a rake at all times.
Yes, so I can practice.
Yeah.
But I used to pay her rent in coins, and she was a Jehovah's Witness, and she was like, "As long as you pay me, I don't care how." Yeah.
Wow. Okay. So how do you get? When does the idea you're juggling in the late 80s, doing magic in Covent Garden, making your living off of this? What's the transition into? I think I'd like to juggle with. Is it that you want to juggle with someone else and create shows? Is it that you want to create a narrative? What's the next step towards?
So there's two things for me. One was my dad's quite an artistic, he's a science person, but I grew up with literature and contemporary classical music. And I think I always had an ambition of doing something, for want of a better word, more artistic with it. And I used to practice at a place called Jubilee Hall, which is still there in Covent Garden.
Yeah.
And there used to be these independent dance classes that would happen, sort of very release, experimental movement, with some of the dancers that were dancing at the time with a woman called Siobhan Davis, who used to was choreographing a lot at that point. And there's a very charming man called Scott Clark who used to stop and watch me juggle. And he said to me, you know, some of the dancing we do would be really good for you. So that was my first revelation, the discovery of dance, because my artistic upbringing, for some reason, had excluded dance. So I discovered dance then. And then my wife and working partner appeared one day. So I just finished a show in Covent Garden, and this very beautiful, elegant Finnish woman turned up, and she said, "Can I play with your clubs?" I know that sounds quite, and I think she says that I was a little bit condescending, but she picked up 2 clubs and she
Well, did you have any idea if she was a juggler or anything?
I had no idea.
Because this is outside.
This is outside and juggling.
So someone comes up to you and says, "Can I play with your juggling
There was hardly any
clubs?"
women in juggling at that point. So she picked up 2 clubs and she threw one as a double going the right way round and one as a double going the other way round. And she caught one behind the back and one under the leg whilst doing a turn. And then I was like, oh my God, who is this goddess woman?
I feel like this is the beginning of some sort of rom-com or something. Someone comes up, you think they're just an audience member, watching in Covent Garden, okay, yeah, show us what you got. And then boom, it's just completely impressive.
But, and so then she had just retired from rhythmic gymnastics.
Okay.
So she didn't know how to juggle 3 things, but she could throw and catch things till the cows came down.
Right, okay.
And then she had retired from rhythmic gymnastics and was working as an au pair in London. And she'd come every Sunday. And I got very intrigued by this elegant Finnish woman who would turn up on Sunday. And then we started doing more and more juggling together. And then we became a couple. And then we explicitly at that point said, there's more to juggling. Juggling has this enormous potential. It was partly through going to see a bunch of dance at that point and watching rhythmic gymnastics videos that we thought we were a little bit dissatisfied with the aesthetics of juggling at that point. There was some phenomenal juggling happening, but it was within a very restricted aesthetic.
Was it mostly people on their own doing juggling?
There was some group. And in fact, there was an American group called Air Jazz who was doing some organized things. And there was a kind of circus tradition of passing. But juggling hadn't existed in a more contemporary. There's a couple of exceptions. A person called Michael Motion who did the hands for David Bowie in Labyrinth and who launched, for better or for worse, the craze of rolling crystal balls on the hand, which again, I mean, he very much questioned what juggling is and what it isn't. But certainly within a more dance aesthetic, a more avant-garde aesthetic, juggling hadn't been there.
Yeah, because I'm thinking about now, I'm interested, one of the things I wanted to talk to you about a little bit was the history of juggling, what there is of the history of juggling. And so here the two of you got together and you got rhythmic gymnastics and dancing. You're thinking, okay, there's something more to this. So at that point, and also just maybe as a general overview, what is the history of juggling as we know it?
Okay, so there's also, I'll do a 3-minute history of juggling.
Sure, yeah.
I mean, it's very difficult because juggling being a moving art form, the recordings, for example, the earliest depiction of juggling is 3 Egyptian women in this marvelous position, a sort of rectilinear, elbows folded, with balls. It's clearly juggling. And I love that it's women, but we have no idea what they juggled. And then there's a number of depictions throughout the years, but you can never really tell what the patterns are. There's very little writing describing patterns or describing routines. The writing describing routines maybe starts 19th century.
Okay.
And it's often linked up with descriptions of magic. And then there's, in the 1920s, there's a couple of illustrious, very famous, much more famous than any juggler at the moment. There's Enrico Rastelli and Cinchiavelli, who both reach a level of fame which is inconceivable, I think, at the moment for a juggler. Maybe somebody will come and do a David Blaine with juggling. And then in the 20s, they used to have full 1-hour shows that were just juggling. And then juggling also has its association with circus.
Yeah.
And circus is a bit random because it's a random 16 skills. Somebody's gone, okay, these are the 16 skills that exist.
I didn't even realize. So there's a categorization of these are circus skills.
It's not a written categorization, but it's very social culturally accepted.
And
like, for example,
some of the other ones?
if somebody, for example, there'd be trapeze.
Oh, yeah, okay.
There would be clowning.
Yeah.
It used to be have an animal act.
Okay.
There's an aesthetic that's very circus, which I think was very imprisoning for juggling. And then there was vaudeville and variety, where you would have the 6 minutes. There was a famous American juggler called Bobby May, who was kind of the Fred Astaire of juggling. So there's been this history, and it's very linked up with popular culture and entertainment. It certainly had not been considered high art for whatever that means, like opera singing or ballet. But there's this amazing social cultural definition of things, because if Louis XIV, who is credited with starting ballet, if he had an obsession with juggling instead of ballet, perhaps the Western world would be full of juggling houses, and there'd be ballerinas in Covent Garden setting fire to their point shoes. So there's an alternative history. I think it's slightly random.
I'd love to go into some of the fascinating collaborations that you've done and what you've learned from collaborating with different art forms. And I think a good place to start would be one that you hinted at, which is the 4,000-year-old hieroglyphics of people, these women juggling on an Egyptian cemetery. I was reading about this, which inspired the juggling. Yes or no? Tell me about this Philip Glass opera,
Akhenaten.
Yeah. So tell me about that and how. And I guess what we're doing is we're starting to go into this. Well, maybe it's worth saying. So, is there anything that you should share a little bit about how the company then began? Because so the two of you got together, you decided there's more to juggling.
Yes, and we then met a woman called Jill Clark, who was another of the dancers with Siobhan Davis, and we made a series of pieces in the 90s that were very experimental, very avant-garde. They were a little bit rooted in the Judson Church American dance movement. So it was very much, we were coming from an aesthetic where the thing you show is the thing. So there's no need for narrative. There's no need for meaning. Maybe rooted in some of Cunningham's ideas that we then returned to later. And we were even in our kind of effervescent youth, ferociously anti-narrative. That I wouldn't say abstract, but things needed to be. And then we did this for about 10 years. And then Kati and I had a gig in Italy, and we had this little duet that was very intertwined arms. And I said to Kati, why don't we put an old Italian romantic song on top of this duet, just as a kind of experiment, and people will love it. And it kind of worked.
Now, is this the beginning of Stop Breaking My Balls?
Yeah,
okay.
That was kind of where... And to me, initially, I felt very manipulative. And it felt wrong to do that. And then I realized that, in a way, that's what theatre is. That for a better cause, the manipulation of the viewer. That's what you're doing. You're adding, or cinema editor, you add an opera track. And then I felt like we had this freedom all of a sudden where actually juggling doesn't have to be so imprisoned in a particular aesthetics. In fact, you could do a tabula rasa on it and it can be whatever you want it to be. It's just this vocabulary. And so then we introduced narrative. We worked with a man called John Paul Zaccarini, and we made this piece that addressed a little bit our relationship. And it was the first time that we had the notion of narrative or the notion of theatre in what we did.
Interesting. Okay, and then let's jump now to, because there's so many different collaborations and shows that you've done, but while we're still kind of off the back of the history of juggling and the genesis of your company and your collaboration, let's talk about this Philip Glass opera, Akhenaten.
Yes.
And I guess the inspiration of the Egyptian painting and how that came to be, but then also how that was integrated as a part of the opera and the story.
So Akhenaten for us has been this incredible gift. We've done it now over 50 times in it had 8 runs, and it's going to have some more runs in the near future in New York, and it's taken us to the greatest opera houses of the planet. It's been a gift. The director, Phelim McDermott, he was having some pelvis issues and went into a flotation tank when he was trying to think.
This was before the show was conceived.
Before the show,
okay.
And he didn't know what. He did Satyagraha, which is the first of the Philip Glass trilogy, with puppets. And then he thought, I can't do puppets again. What is the angle on this? And then he fell asleep in this flotation tank, and he had a vision. He saw a bunch of jugglers. He literally had a dream. And I don't even think it was a positive dream. He just had this. He wasn't sure if it was good or bad. And he asked around. And I think if you ask around and you try and find somebody to choreograph a bunch of jugglers, you end up with us, because there's only about 3 of us in the world. But and so we got into a studio, and then I told Phelim that the earliest depiction is these women and these hieroglyphs. And then we just started with assembling some geometrical juggling that was imagining how these women 3,000 years ago would have juggled.
Now, is Akhenaten set in Egypt already?
So Akhenaten, it's very clever. So Akhenaten, which I'm sure a lot of people know, is a very cryptic Egyptian pharaoh, in that when he died, they tried to destroy all evidence of his existence. And he only reigned 17 years. And he was the first major historical figure to have had only one god. And a lot of people think that maybe Judaism or even Christianity would have come out somehow of people that left. And it's not clear how Akhenaten died, but he's a very illustrious historical figure that people have projected a lot of stuff. I think in the early kind of gay liberation, people projected things into Akhenaten because there's depictions of him as perhaps being hermaphrodite, or I don't know, a lot of the trans movement projected things onto Akhenaten. And the Glass opera hovers between the history and the Victorian discovery that British archaeology at that time. Anyway, so what does this have to do with juggling? So
he had no idea, though, when he was in this flotation tank, that there was an Egyptian painting of people juggling.
He had
the oldest
no idea.
rendition. So these things kind of come together.
It was kind of serendipity. But as soon as he saw that, and then we showed him some things, and he went, we have to do this. And then it took some convincing, because if you do, I sometimes amuse myself by doing a hierarchy of the arts. And certainly juggling is not towards the top.
Sure.
But opera and ballet are towards. And ironically, we've collaborated quite a lot with both. But and so then what was very intriguing was a little bit we use juggling as ritual in the same way that Philip Glass uses these repetitive motifs. So in the traditional way of looking at juggling, you do more and more. And that's very circus. You finish with a big trick. So you don't necessarily start with your lowest trick, but there's a formula to it. And certainly how we use the juggling in Akhenaten is definitely not that same formula. And it's something that very much intrigues me. I was talking to somebody who's written the first thesis, Eric Oberg, who wrote the first thesis on juggling. He's a doctor in juggling just now.
A doctor in juggling, I love that.
About the fact that the ritual we invented in Akhenaten, there's a coronation, and for about 6 minutes, we just juggle these patterns in loops. It's quite hypnotic. And you could imagine that it would exist somewhere in the world, but it doesn't. We don't have anywhere in the world this idea that you would invite 6 jugglers to do a ritual for your wedding or your funeral or a birth. And so it's interesting just to imagine that within the opera.
So when you first started the collaboration and you were exploring different ways to bring juggling in, was there a way in terms of, I guess you knew of this Egyptian painting, but in terms of what the juggling would represent or how it would serve the story kind of thing?
Well, I had a very different idea to Phelim. And in the end, I think what came out is a balancing act between Phelim and our ideas, which I think is that's when collaborations work best, is when both people give in a bit.
Yeah.
I think there's certainly from my experience of having collaborated a lot, if you're able to give in, but if the other person is also able to give in, and then in my initial approach was, hooray, let's choreograph a bunch of juggling to this repetitive music. And Phelim was thinking, how does the juggling help see the music, but also the narrative, the neo-narrative. And there's a couple of obvious things. When Akhenaten dies in the opera, we all drop our balls. And it's quite a potent moment, and it works quite well, that sort of failure, death as the ultimate failure or end. And there's a number, I like what the juggling does in the opera, in that it sometimes plays multiple roles at the same time. Everything in the opera is going really slow, and we are pulsating partly the music and telling this separate story that is, who knows what it is.
Is there any sense, back to the Egyptian, the original kind of inspiration in this, thousands of years old painting, is there any sense as to, you said it was clear that they're juggling, but what it is for?
No, and I like the idea that maybe it was a ritual, that it's got lost. There's little traces of juggling as a ritual or juggling as play. There's an island called Tonga where only the women juggle, and the women only juggle in one specific juggling pattern, which is the shower, where one hand throws and one hand zaps and they juggle little nuts. And in the 70s, when Western jugglers discovered that this existed and went there, the women would juggle because the idea that a man would juggle was kind of funny. In the same way that sort of one has these social cultural norms, like you go, oh, well, men shouldn't wear skirts. That's funny. And in fact, there's Western explorers who turned up in Tonga in the late 19th century, and the women were quite beautiful and would juggle topless. So I think it was this very strange ritual that they witnessed. They went, what's going on here?
So interesting. So you've done a lot of collaborations with other art forms. You talked about opera, obviously, just now, and ballet. Have you found? Let's talk about some of those other collaborations that you've done. But firstly, I was just wondering: have you found certain forms work particularly well with juggling as opposed to others?
Yes, I mean. Actually, it would almost be interesting to look at the opposite, look at the things that don't work. But for us, I used to joke that we were doing Tinder dates with juggling. So we sent juggling out with ballet to go to the movies.
Okay.
And they got on really well. And so we made this piece called 4x4, which I absolutely loved. And I could have made juggling and ballet pieces for the rest of my life. I was just so happy in that place. In fact, it gave me a ballet addiction. We made a piece that was juggling Bharatanatyam, which is one of the classical Indian dance forms.
Oh, wow.
And there we really focused, because juggling is quite a musical art form, or percussive, I should say.
Yeah.
And so again, I could make percussive juggling all day long. Unfortunately, we only have one of these lives.
So what made you, what made it work particularly well with ballet?
With ballet, it was the sense of ritual. What the things gave to each other. So what ballet gave us was classicism. Juggling doesn't have classicism, or the classicism it has is, as we were talking about earlier, relates to circus or something like that. But I love the weirdness of ballet in that you go, okay, oh, no, you must always start facing that corner of the room and your shoulder.
Right.
And I like this idea of imagining every time you juggle 5 balls, your feet must be in this position and you must take a breath through your left nostril.
Okay.
So it was this idea of ritual and classicism. And then structure. I felt like it was really easy because ballet's structure is so codified. And our structure, which is very recent, how they intertwined. Yeah, there was something about the aesthetics of it that felt very logical to me.
Well, you teased this, so I'm going to ask it. What doesn't work with juggling, or what is the hardest thing, or something that was particularly didn't fit, or just was really challenging to make work?
For me personally, I don't feel like juggling, and indeed circus. I think juggling and circus are really bad storytellers. I think you can force them to be that, but intrinsically, like at the moment, there's a fashion for political circus, and by that I mean circus which has an agenda, and I often agree with the agenda that this circus is addressing, but I don't feel like, for example, trapeze is the best instrument to deal with climate change or global warming, or there's a fad, and I think it's across the art forms, it's not just circus, but I don't feel like necessarily, if I wanted to tell Romeo and Juliet, and I'm sure somebody will come along and prove me wrong, I don't think necessarily ring juggling is the way to do that.
Okay, so juggling with a play or with a story in that
For
way.
me, that's a difficult one.
Now, is it all narrative? Because obviously there's narrative in opera and there's narrative in ballet. Is it more like a play with words?
Maybe it's literally, maybe it's a play with words. But then at the same time, I have it at the back of my mind that we should make a musical at some point.
Yeah.
And I think it's a puzzling. There's some things. Actually, when we worked with magic, it wasn't easy. If I work, I mean, I've also been around dance a long time. So any form of dance and juggling, I find just.
Well, I guess when you get into plays and word-based narratives, it can become, not always, and this is where musicals might work, I think, I'm just trying to think of Romeo and Juliet and how you could make it work. But with plays, and especially the more contemporary, it starts to become very kind of literal in the sense that there's not as much of an abstract. I mean, as I'm thinking about Shakespeare, I do think, I don't know how it would work, but there is something, there's obviously very strong rhythm in it. And so there's something about, when we're speaking in verse versus when we're speaking in prose, and the verse has a really strong structure to it, of which some directors follow through in that structure and some completely ignore it. So maybe there's something in that. But
it's interesting because what you highlighted, which is what I would highlight, is the rhythmic structure of the language, which I find totally fascinating. But not the story. But I think, like with magic, we struggled, and then I was very happy with the result, but we suffered. I'm used to, in the rehearsal space, that we sketch something and quite quickly we get results that I'm happy or we're happy with. Whereas I wouldn't say that was true with. And I can see myself, if I had to, which I don't think that's going to happen, but do a Romeo and Juliet. That it would
you know
be,
what? You never know.
You never know. You never know.
What would be like the most unusual thing that you've collaborated with in terms of juggling? And then also, sort of second question to that, the most unusual thing that you have juggled? Because I would imagine it's not just balls.
We juggle
you have a
all
show
kinds.
where you got apples.
So the show we do with apples is crazy. So it's a homage to the extraordinary German choreographer Pina Bausch.
Oh yeah.
And we made it in a week. I was just looking recently at the video because it's about 15 years old now, and we've done it 1,000 times across the globe. Isn't that mad? And so we made it in a week as a kind of sarcastic comment on juggling and things, and a kind of little love letter to Pina Bausch. But it stayed in the repertoire, and essentially it's an hour of juggling apples, and at the end we juggle plates and smash them all. It's this therapeutic end. And somebody, a famous English producer, came to see the show when we did it. And he said to us, "You're crazy. You will never sell this. This is..." And I love that idea that sometimes, like, there's this thing where you shouldn't have too many performers and don't finish with smashing everything up and kind of it. I mean, I think sometimes by doing the opposite to the norm, it can
So do you
work.
think that's the most unusual object in terms of the most unusual thing that you have juggled?
No. I think we juggled a bunch. Way back when I was starting out, I did a program for the BBC, and actually it was about saving and ecological things. It was in the early days of us realizing the terrible things we're doing to the planet. But they wanted me to juggle this pygmy pig. And I was like, no, I can't throw a pig in the air. But then I realized this.
And how many did they want you to juggle?
Well, there was only one, thankfully. And I always used to joke
that... you have to juggle more than two things for it to be juggling.
So then I think I did a pygmy pig and two fruits. But then what I did, there's something called the baby juggling pattern, which is if a friend of yours has a newborn baby and they lend you the baby, the rule number one, never throw the baby. Yeah. So So there's a way that you can...
should be that's an unspoken rule.
I think most parents know that. Is it? I think when you go to like your first childbirth classes, they tell you that. It's don't throw the baby.
Okay.
Don't juggle cacti and don't throw the baby.
Yeah.
So you hold the baby in one hand and you have 2 balls in the other hand.
Okay.
You throw the 2 balls high and you transfer the baby from one hand to the other.
Okay, so you're not throwing the baby
So
out.
that's what I did with this adorable pygmy pig.
Oh, that's what you did with the pig.
Somewhere in the BBC archives is
juggle
me
the pig, but you
throwing,
didn't throw it up.
Yeah. It's legal in Guatemala to juggle. Yeah.
To juggle
Still, yeah.
pigs?
Yeah.
Is it not legal
no, I'm
here?
joking. Well, I hope it's not legal. No.
Oh my God. Okay, and then in terms of the most unusual, I guess, subject or collaboration, you've had ballet, you've had opera, music, other types of music, live music. Is there anything really unusual?
When we used to do corporate shows, which we still sometimes do, there was a famous London-based big advertising company who asked us to juggle vibrators in their kind of end of year something, and probably terrifyingly politically incorrect what it was alluding to. But then I remember going to all the sex shops in Soho and asking to test the vibrators for juggability. And I think back then there was less choice. So yeah, maybe one needs to redo that journey.
Now, I'm also thinking about, looking through the catalog of different shows that you've done with Gandini Juggling, there's been lots of interesting collaborations and themes and types of shows. And one of the ones that stood out to me the most that I really would love to hear about is a show called The Games We Play, which is described as a lecture that pretends to be a show, or maybe a show that pretends to be a lecture. Can you tell me a little bit about The Games We Play? What is it about, and how did that idea
So that
come?
we went back after. So for a while it was Kati and I and a few jugglers, and then the company got bigger and bigger, and we experimented with things with 15 jugglers, 20 jugglers, and we thought, let's go back to the roots and just Kati and I. And so it is exactly that. It's a lecture, but we play a lot. Actually, we were talking a moment ago about the rhythm of words and how juggling relates to the rhythm of words and rituals. And then we invented some stories that related to juggling. So, for example, we talked about a fictitious juggler called Tremani, Napolitan juggler, who had 3 hands, and his 3rd hand was just above his navel. Or we talked about the famous Lola, the juggling pig, who she was touring at the same time as young Mozart, and she used to tour the courthouses of Europe, juggling golden thimbles on her trotters. And so it's intertwined with these stories. And the final story in the piece is very dark, and it's based on a Czech novel, which is a juggler who was in a concentration camp with his wife, and he gets taken out by the guards, and they put a gun to his wife's head, and they ask him to juggle 5 billiard balls, and they say, if you drop the billiard balls, we will shoot your wife.
Oh, wow.
And kind of the show goes on from there.
And is that you're telling the stories while you're juggling? Or
Yeah,
is it...
exactly that. So we tell and it has some seated, it has a number of sections. We've had this obsession with transforming juggling up in the air into juggling going down onto tables. So like it's in a way taking apart the structure of juggling.
I want to learn a little bit more about the games we play. So, it's talked about as being, you've got these different stories, but it's a lecture pretending to be a show, or a show pretending to be a lecture, exploring philosophical ideas. What do you think the audience goes away with, or what did you get from it? And just in terms of like the philosophical angle of it, like what are the philosophical questions that are being explored?
Well, it plays a little bit with what's true and what isn't true, and a fictitious history of our art form, because our art form has many gaps in it. And it links up a little bit to the art that Kati and I enjoy, and what if juggling had been closer. Like at one point we talk about some Russian icons that depict juggling in the Hermitage Museum in St. Petersburg, which don't exist, of course, but philosophically as well, how you describe patterns and what their appeal is. And I mean, it's a little bit the conversation we've had socioculturally. Where does a given art form fit in? And why is it in that place? Is that its ultimate role, or is there a historical context that's put it in that place?
I was wondering also about, as I came across something that I hadn't really thought about, but I guess is something that weighs on jugglers, similar to maybe stage actors who at various times in their careers might struggle with lines, or there's a fear, stage fright. As they get older, maybe they fear, not being able to remember their lines as well, which is the drop.
Yes.
And I don't know if this comes into the philosophy, into the games we play, but when I was reading about different people's point of view on dropping a ball.
Yes.
You said actually in an interview that the drop is like mortality. You just have to pretend it's not there, which I thought was interesting. So how does the drop come into, whether it's that show or just work as a juggler in general?
So the drop is a kind of constantly there. It can be from totally claustrophobic, anxious-inducing thing to something that can be a release. And in different shows, we've treated it in different ways. You're right. In the games we play, we do address it philosophically. That scene that I was telling you about, the person who's juggling 5 balls whilst their partner has a gun to their head, is in a sense pushing, if you drop, somebody dies. And so it's pushing it to its extreme. And I think in the show, I say, eventually everybody always drops. So in a way, juggling is only existing very ephemerally because either you stop or everything goes wrong. We made a piece which is a love letter to Merce Cunningham, and Cunningham used to like pushing the dancers to a point where they were almost unable to do some of the material. And he thought it was interesting to watch the negotiation of somebody doing a step that's almost impossible. And at the beginning of the Cunningham piece, I used to speak to the audience. I used to say, drops are really beautiful. They're these beautiful philosophical moments of contemplation. There's an American book called Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, where he describes a screw breaking on his motorbike and he can't get to the screw. And then he has this kind of Buddhist revelation where he goes, this is the most beautiful moment of my life because I don't know how to solve this problem and I need to work out. And I kind of associated within that piece that's called Life, the piece about Cunningham, the drops being a philosophically beautiful moment. The street performance way of dealing with it is you cover it with a line. So damn you, Newton, or those kind of things. And in fact, in the games we play, we do a section where we do all the street.
Because how common is a drop? I mean, is that pretty?
They're pretty. Every juggler drops, and it's part of the thing.
Because I guess in some ways the difference with juggling and maybe dance, but definitely acting on the stage, is when you drop a line, the actor usually feels horrible, but the audience 99.9% of the time doesn't know.
Yep.
Because they don't notice, or it's covered, or they play it off.
No, in
whereas
juggling,
a drop is pretty obvious.
I mean, in Akhenaten, so in Akhenaten, we do 22,000 catches from the beginning of the show to the end. And actually, we drop remarkably little. We have done the show almost clean. And the applause at the end is maybe a little bit more. We get good applause at the end of the show, but it's a little bit more subdued than if we drop a few times.
Yeah, right.
And then we had one show where we dropped way more in one. We had a minute where there was some misunderstanding between a couple of the jugglers, and we dropped what I thought was a tremendous amount, and we got a huge round of applause at the end. So, and it kind of, in a way, it annoyed me that people didn't care more. But I think there's a humanizing factor. Yeah. Obviously, you don't. If you're watching somebody juggle for 3 minutes, you don't want it to be a drop fest. But it's part of the thing. Yeah. There's so many different ways of dropping it. The classical variety way of dealing with it is you practice so much that you don't drop, which in a way is silly. Then there's the having a little funny thing, like it's a magician trick, but some jugglers have used it, where you give yourself a medal when you do a good trick and then you take it away if you drop. Steve Martin had a great. Steve Martin started out as a juggler. Yeah, Steve Martin is great.
So and he's in London right now filming.
Is he really?
I keep
I didn't know
on
that.
Instagram he's posting because he's filming a TV show.
So Steve Martin's drop line is that, oh, I love it when they go far away as they roll away. It's great. I love it when they go far. But only Steve could make that line work.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Well, actually, this brings me to something that I wanted to just to ask you about, which is, well, you teach juggling as well. Yeah. And I guess the first thing I would ask about teaching juggling or how one becomes a juggler is what's the foundation? What makes a good juggler? How do you start?
Oh, that's one of those weird things that I think you can apply to any skill where there's a common thing where you go, everybody can become good at any skill. And I genuinely believe that liberal approach. But there's an innate thing that you see sometimes in people where they'll pick something up and you go, you're so natural at this. Mm-hmm. I mean, a lot of very, very good jugglers, you need an ounce of obsession. It's totally absurd. Why would you spend 3 hours a day in a corner alone throwing things up and picking them up from the floor? Yeah. So I think a certain amount of obsession, the pleasure of pattern. So in recent years, there's been a couple of very good dancers who have learned juggling in a dancer way that I find totally intriguing. Just as an example, there's a woman called Jennifer Goggins who was one of the great Merce Cunningham dancers. And for the last 5 years, she's juggled. And she learns juggling in such an amazing way. She adores the complexity of it. And the more complicated it is, the more her mind will take the puzzle. And she's one of the only people I've met who finds it easier to learn a pattern if the pattern's got steps on it. I know just before we were recording, you were talking about tap dancing. So if I were to give her something where it went ta-ta-ti-ta-pa-pa-ti-ta-ta-pa-pa with the feet and the hands were doing something different, she would totally glue onto that and learn. But I think I'm sidetracking.
Well, I'm just curious. So if you're teaching a class, obviously there are certain types of people that are going to be more inclined to learning it. But is there a basic pattern or exercise or something that you start with?
Actually, do you know what rhythm I've realized recently? So I used to think rhythm and having played ball sports, but we have another dancer who used to hate ball sports as a kid and who learned to juggle with us. And her dad came to see the show. And when he watched the juggle, he went, I don't understand. When you were a kid, I used to throw your ball and it used to hit you on the head. You wouldn't be able to catch it. How can you do this stuff? But like we recently worked with percussionists and they all learned juggling so fast.
Rhythm.
It's like they learn it. It's like straight off.
It is funny what you say about the sports thing, though, because I do think some people who go into the arts have trauma, whether it's extreme or low-level trauma, to sort of sports from school. Because back to the very beginning of my rehearsals when I'm doing plays, is we often throw, on the very first day, there's a few people that are like, this is really bringing my anxiety up because of my ball game trauma. But a lot of it has to do with rhythm and connection to each other.
Definitely rhythm and connection and coordination. But actually, like, for example, we always teach the choruses in the operas we go to juggle. And they learn really well. Again, because you can teach juggling in different ways. We tend to connect it a lot with rhythm because we work so much in dance and music. So we tend to connect it to cycles that you can count. And opera singers are so used to counting, and musicians, I find, learn very quickly. Dancers, but actually, I should probably get myself into trouble saying this, but contemporary dancers learn quicker than ballet dancers.
Oh, interesting. That to me seems surprising in a way, because I think of sort of ballet as having more, I guess, structure to it, but maybe that's limiting.
Yes, but it also could be to do with what you were saying. There a lot of people that have done a lot of ballet didn't do ball sports at all.
Yeah, right.
Whereas, I mean, I'm making a silly generalization.
Sure.
I've known a few ballet dancers who've become extraordinary jugglers.
Of course.
So,
So the last thing I was just interested about in terms of learning juggling is, what do you think, whether you're doing it professionally or someone just wants to pick it up now after listening to this conversation, does juggling, you could say I take a dance class, it's good for coordination and it's cardio or whatever, but what do you think juggling does for somebody, for the brain?
There's a unique brain place that you go to whilst juggling that I haven't found in any other activity. It brings its own thing. And I think like I enjoy playing the piano and I love the place I go to, or I enjoy dancing and I love the mental place. But the place you go to with juggling, it's almost like the world goes away. And it's a very meditative, I mean, I certainly, over the years, like everybody else, I've had my issues and my worries. And if I get into a studio with a few juggling props, I forget the world and I'm just in this world of pure patterns.
It is so interesting because it's a repeated pattern. But you can't stop focusing on it. Like it's you can't really tune out. Because I actually think now I'm making this parallel to the ball game that I do in the rehearsal hall, because the harder it gets, the more you have to focus, but it's also about maintaining that repetitive sort of, as you say, meditative thing over and over and over again.
Yes, it's exactly that. And there's also... But you get this in many skills. There's always more to learn. So it's this amazingly beautiful, infinite.
And more complicated.
But if you don't juggle, you're in the best place in the world with juggling, because the going from not juggling to juggling is a step that's achievable by everybody. And it's so satisfying. And arguably, you will never have such a big thrill. You're never going to have such a, like, you can't juggle and then you can juggle. That's like
And what do you think the first step is? Is it three juggling balls?
Well, the way we teach juggling is we do a structure thing. So we do a little bit of rhythm games with one ball where it can either stay in the same hand or it could cross. It can go at different heights. Some 2-ball exercises and then 3 balls. In the traditional way that you teach, you go straight. Yeah. You do a little bit of practicing with 2 balls and you go for 3.
Yeah. Oh, I love it. Now, just before we close, what shows do you have coming up this year or within the next year that people can check out around the world?
So we're going back into touring Heka, which is magic and juggling, which I love.
Great.
Smashed 1 and Smashed 2. I didn't talk about Smashed 2, but Smashed 2 is a reply to Smashed 1, because Smashed 1 is 7 men and 2 women, and the men are extremely nasty with the women. Okay. So Smashed 2 is the Thelma and Louise, the revenge. Okay. So Smashed 1 and Smashed 2 are on tour. We also have a tiny duet that's called You Two Can Tutu, which is... ballet and juggling again.
Is that outside? Is that the outside
one? That one is, outside,
great.
But we're bringing it indoors and we're working on a number of other...
And are you going to do that opera again? Because
we're doing the opera again. So,
but I have to go to
the
New York
next
to see
outing is at the Metropolitan Opera House in New York.
That would be
it's
amazing.
It's an excuse to go to New York.
Yeah, you know what? It's been a while. I haven't been to New York in a while. That would be because I've seen clips of it obviously on YouTube and things, and it looks incredible.
It's extraordinary. I mean, I can, even if you took our juggling out, it's an extraordinary. The music is it takes you to a very unique place, and it's worth traveling to New York on a rowboat.
Well, check it out. Otherwise, where can they find info about the shows?
Our website has a lot of information. Website and Instagram account has.
Okay.
Yeah.
Fantastic. We'll link those in the show notes so that people can check them out. But thank you so much for teaching me and us all about juggling. It's been a pleasure talking to you today, Sean.
It's been a pleasure talking to you, and I look forward to seeing what you do with this.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Well, that's today's episode. If you'd like to help the Big Smoke keep the conversation up in the air, why not share this episode with a friend? And next time life asks you to juggle one thing too many, remember, even the professionals drop the ball from time to time. What matters is having the determination to throw it back into the air, just as we do here in the Big Smoke.